Good morning, Tom and Bruce.
Morning.
Morning.
Since we have a couple minutes before we get started, if folks just want to briefly introduce themselves and we can take some of that time for this. Ryan, do you want to say something? You introduce yourself, Ryan Shaner?
Yeah, no problem. Hi, I'm Ryan Shaner. I'm DPW Records Manager and GIS Specialist for the township.
Ryan?
Yeah, for now, I'm Brian Shorkey. I'm the Senior Planner at Meridian Charter Township.
And Tom, and then John?
Tom Frazier on the Meridian Environmental Commission.
John Sarver, I'm also on the Township Environmental Commission.
Amanda and Charles, you want to say, introduce yourself?
I'm Amanda Hathaway Frederelli. I'm an Environmental Sustainability Program Manager with the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission.
Great. Charles and Bruce and Kim?
Sure, I'm Charlie Katz, longtime Meridian Township resident, and now I'm just a retired curmudgeon here in the township.
Bruce Peffers. I'm Meridian Township resident on the Meridian Conservation Corps and also on the Corridor Improvement Authority.
Kim and then Sarah?
Hi, I'm Kim Peters and I live in Meridian Township.
Sarah Allen, I'm on the green team with Meridian, and I am doing a lot of working with the schools to get to be more environmentally friendly and that kind of thing. Thanks.
Awesome. And I'll just briefly introduce Tom. And Tom, if you want to add or subtract anything from what I say, feel free. We're recording today's conversation. Thank you all for being here. We've talked a lot about native plants, pesticides, and a lot of topics that Tom deals with every day. And so glad that you could be here. Tom's an extension specialist with MSU. He's the director of the National Pesticide Safety Education Center, former executive director of the Michigan Groundwater Association and Turfgrass Foundation, former president of the Capillary Landscape and Nurserymen's Association, where I first met Tom. Tom was instrumental in doing a lot of education with Urban Options, where I formerly worked over the years, also helping with native landscaping. And then as an owner of Grassroots, he's helped with plant rescue, and I personally purchased some of his rescued plants for a landscape that I worked on about 30 years ago, 25 years ago. What would you add to that, Tom?
I'm a proud grandfather of 5, so that's a big thing. And other than that, I think you did a very nice job, Leroy. And good morning to everybody. I'm delighted to be here. And as you can imagine, Leroy and I go back quite a ways with our work and crossing paths. So when he contacted me, I was really excited to join this this dialogue.
Well, fantastic. We pretty much run it like whatever questions that people have, but if you would like to just give us a brief intro of any things that are hot on your mind or things that you are currently working on that might kick us off a little bit.
Sure.
And then just mute yourself if you're not, if it's convenient, if you're not speaking. Go ahead.
So I just thought I would provide a little bit of background, especially about my role right now. So I am with MSU Extension. I'm an extension specialist in agriculture and agribusiness, but I have a somewhat unusual appointment in that 90% of my contract is bought out to run this National Center for Pesticide Safety Education. And it is independent from Michigan State University. We have a very straightforward mission, and that's to serve and support the extension pesticide safety education programs in every state in U.S. territory. So we do a lot of work related to that. So those are the educators that are working with pesticide applicators to make sure They are trained properly, they're educated properly. The pesticide safety education program educators work hand in hand, typically with their departments of agriculture, because the Department of Agriculture or some other state agency would be the regulatory authority for those pesticide applicators. So what we're doing is we're really providing resources for those educators to help do their job. Many of them are single person operations. They're kind of within extension at universities, at land grant universities, but many times because they're out and about, they're not fully integrated into that system very effectively. So some of the things we do is we have a store site that has a number of resources in a variety of languages. It's just knapsackstore.com, NPSEC, and you can certainly check that out for a variety of resources related to pesticide safety education, related to the manuals that different states need for their pesticide applicators, and also some fun things. We do a lot of work with pollinators, so we have a nice pollinator wheel that would be very appropriate for children to use. So items like that. I have a really great book on spiders, a children's book that one of the educators from Kansas wrote. So there are some fun things on that site as well, some compliance types of required posters. We focus not only on pesticide safety education, but also on worker protection. So again, I want to stress that the National Center, we're not lobbyists, we're not an advocate for anything. We're simply there to make sure that these programs in extension stay viable, because many of them are very resource limited. I also, with my university hat on at Michigan State, I also manage an EPA grant, which is a $2.5 million grant for conducting meetings around certification and training and worker protection. And we have a biennial national meeting that will actually be coming up in Michigan in May, but we also do a lot of work in a variety of areas. I mentioned pollinators. We have a very robust team doing a lot of work for youth education. There's a lot of, it's a crowded space when you talk about pollinators on a national scale. So there's a lot of organizations. We're not trying to duplicate what anybody is doing. We're trying to really provide a platform for a number of groups to get together. Do a lot of work with IPM, Integrated Pest Management. And for those of you that are working in that area, there's a really good group that meets on a regular basis. It's a school IPM, National School IPM group. And so if you're interested in that, I can certainly get information about that. Still very passionate about native plants, native habitats. My own landscape is extremely diverse and what I like to think is sustainable. I don't do any supplemental watering. I don't do any insecticides, fungicides. I do kind of limited herbicide application to just kind of manage it. So I'm happy to really talk about or respond to any questions, comments you may have. Probably the biggest thing happening with the regulatory environment right now is we have new certification and training rules that have been adopted by the Environmental Protection Agency. It won't change dramatically how pesticide applicators are educated and certified, but those are new rules. And the worker protection standards, that is relatively new as well. It was implemented or passed in 2015, but as you can imagine, there's always lawsuits, and by the time it gets fully implemented, it takes some time. So if anybody has any questions about that, those apply to workers, what they call workers and handlers in agricultural operations. So they don't apply to lawn care, they don't apply to structural pest control like interior. Those rules apply to workers and handlers are defined as those that either mix, load, or apply pesticides. They have brought some things up to snuff or up to speed with other occupations. give you just one quick example, then I'm going to shut up and open it up. In the past with agriculture, there were no training requirements or medical fit tests required for respirators. Every other occupation, if you worked for a company doing painting, for example, and respirators required, you had to go through a medical exam and a required fit test and annual training. The worker protection standard from 2015 changed that, where agriculture now is required to do those same things that every occupation goes through. So I think a lot of positive changes to protect those workers. So I will, again, be quiet, and hopefully we have some questions. I'd be happy to talk about native plants, native habitats, anything related to the pesticide area. But I just want to really define again what that center's doing. We really are supporting those programs, which I think are very, very important.
Yeah, Tom, I'm kind of wondering from your perspective, is there a role for local governments and townships in this area? And what, if there was a role, what would that be?
When you talk about this area, you talk about more the pesticide end, or
Well,
in everything.
Native plants and also pesticides, because I think in terms of pesticide regulation, it sounds like it gets pretty technical, and I'm not sure exactly how a township or maybe even a city could be involved. But,
yeah, and let me answer that one first, and I'll go to certainly the native plants and habitats and what you can do there. There have been some efforts by local governments to add on regulations related to pesticides. And I was involved when I was president of the Capital Area Nursery and Landscape Association with City of East Lansing. The difficulty becomes when you're in a business like that and you have multiple regulations across local jurisdictions. It's very, very hard to keep track of that and be in compliance. So I think if you talk to the industry, and this is again just industry viewpoint, they are in favor of statewide regulations, because EPA for the most part delegates the enforcement of the federal laws to the states, and the states can have more stringent regulations than the federal law. The federal law is kind of a minimum floor. It's the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, but the states, and most states do, have additional regulations. So it is very technical. It becomes probably a very difficult enforcement activity at the local level. The state has a number of inspectors. So probably one of the things that a local government would want to do is to make sure that their citizens know who to contact if there is an issue with pesticides, and that would be Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, their pesticide division. So getting that information out is certainly worthwhile. Now, again, just my opinions, and again, there's a lot of back and forth with local regulations. With native plants, with native habitats, we certainly have some wetland protection laws in place at the state level, at the federal level. But I think with your zoning ordinances, with some of the landscape ordinances, those are very good ways to incentivize the use of native plants, of creating habitat. I mentioned we work in pollinators, and we're seeing a drastic reduction in some of the pollinators, particularly native pollinators, who people don't even know they exist. So when we think of pollinators, we think of honeybees, which are managed pollinators, but we don't know the myriad of native pollinators that are typically solitary bees that just are not very visible, and they rely on habitat. We think of also some more visible pollinators, butterflies, And of course, monarchs have been in decline. So creating habitat for those types of beneficial organisms, I think is a win-win for everyone. Also, in creating that habitat, you create habitat for natural predators that are going to keep pest populations down. So extremely beneficial. I also think that we see a lot of, there are some significant issues around regulations related to mosquito control and what type of habitat you find mosquitoes in. A very good wetland with standing water is not going to have mosquitoes because it's going to have so many predators in that system. Our mosquitoes are coming from the abandoned tire that has water in it. It's the bucket of that's left out that mosquitoes breed in. So getting some of that education out, how to control mosquitoes or how to reduce mosquitoes in your area. This is anecdotal only, but I was always amazed when around my home, which I'm out in Eldon Township. I have a cattail marsh behind me. I have woodlands around. I have a landscape that has minimal maintained lawn. I have over 450 different kinds of plants. I have very few mosquitoes. And it was interesting when I would go to visit friends or friends of my children. And I'll mention, in Meridian Township, in some of the subdivisions that are much different looking than my landscape, the level of mosquitoes in those areas is much, much higher than I have. So again, very anecdotal, observational, but we can do a lot on our landscapes by again, encouraging diversity in plant material. Again, eliminating some of the highly managed areas that don't provide that diversity. And you're also going to get additional benefits by attracting pollinators and attracting some of those beneficial insects that will feed on our things that damage plants. So it's kind of, again, my 2 cents worth. Long answer to your question. So
Great answer. What other questions do people have? Or observations?
Tom, we've talked before in this group about wondering if there were any kind of, kind of green certification for lawn care providers, so people would know that, carefully evaluating whether fertilizers are needed and the best kinds of pesticides. Could you tell us anything about that?
sure. So I know there are some in other states. I work with that group that I mentioned, it's the IPM in schools working group, and they have some green certification program. I don't know of any in Michigan, but that's not because they don't exist, just out of my ignorance. So I think what I've seen happen, and Leroy can be congratulated on this, he's produced a lot of really good information for consumers to understand, if you're choosing a lawn care company, some of the questions to ask. There are basic things that you'd want to do, like soil testing. Phosphorus is the major surface pollutant, or a pollutant in surface waters. Most of our soils have adequate phosphorus. And so before you do any fertilizer application, you'd want to make sure that you do soil test. Mowing height is critical. Again, the higher you can mow, weed seeds need light to germinate. So if you have a dense canopy of turf, then you're not going to get near as many weeds germinating and establishing as if you cut it down. I know in my business, I always had a group of people that were golfers, and they're used to going out on the manicured turf and the low cut, and I would always try to relate to them if I was mowing the lawn, a golf analogy. And I said, I'm mowing your lawn at US Open rough height. Okay, which is they started at 4 inches and they let it grow all week for that tournament for the US Open. So now they have a link to that. But I think mowing height is probably the single most important thing that a consumer, a homeowner can do to reduce problems on the lawn, reduce water use, reduce weed infestation, keep the lawn healthy and vigorous. And most of our 21-inch lawnmowers probably don't go up to even 4 inches. You know, commercial mowers do. So again, I kind of got sidetracked, Amanda. You know, green certification. That might be something interesting to look into. Again, can't really put it too many teeth in that, but you could certainly have voluntary types of green certification. And I say you can't put teeth in it, it's just costly to try to enforce that.
Tom, I had a question. You touched briefly before on mosquito control.
Mm-hmm.
We have quite a few companies in our township and that are hitting the neighborhoods pretty hard regarding offering their mosquito control services. And it's a very non-specific way that they applicate the pesticide. They basically are fogging all the shrubbery and the lawns and so on.
Right.
So it kills everything. And what's your opinion of using mosquito dunks versus the commercial application of pesticides? And,
So
I was just going to say, how do we educate people in the communities, in the neighborhoods, not to go with these large commercial applications, but just to use, more friendly type of control?
Yeah, I think that is something I see quite a bit. And of course, we have Eastern equine encephalitis that has hit our state. And that's a very dangerous disease for humans as well as for horses. So normally when we have, we see that there is almost a panic mode to get mosquito control. So mosquito control is important from a public health standpoint. But I think it makes sense more on that larger public health scale. So again, I'm voicing my opinions. I think getting messaging out about why we have mosquitoes, as I said, they're not coming from the wetlands behind you. They're coming from, water that's in that pot out in the yard that has a saucer to keep water in. It's really coming from a lack of diversity in the landscape. So I would say, first and foremost, get those messages out. What can you do around your own home? What can you do personally around your own home to help manage mosquitoes, reduce the breeding of mosquitoes? Again, eliminating standing water is one of those, particularly in containers. And then what can you do to encourage more natural predators, dragonflies, things like that? As far as the companies, you could put out something that talks about what kind of questions you should be asking these companies, because I think the concept of integrated pest management doesn't say don't use pesticides, but pesticides are one of the tools, and they shouldn't be the go-to tool for what you use. You should be doing these other things first before you are making a pesticide application. That's the whole concept of integrated pest management. So good question. Again, I think there's a lot of problematic issues with just random applications of any pesticide, whether it's lawn care, whether it's mosquito control, whether it's trees and shrubs, without doing those things first. And I'll use another quick analogy. The analogy I use is that, if you go to a doctor and the first thing that the doctor want to do is give you a shot or prescribe a medication without doing any health history, without talking to you about diet, about exercise, you would probably run pretty scared away from that doctor. And that's really the approach I think we need to take in and around our homes, our landscape. What's the history? What have you done? What are you doing to create that more sustainable landscape?
What's your opinion of mosquito dunks versus the use of pesticides?
You know, I have to be honest, my ignorance here. I don't know what a mosquito dunk is, so please educate me.
Oh, it uses a bacteria.
Oh.
And you, the idea is to make these traps, mosquito traps, using mosquito dunks. You just put them in with a like a tray of water with a mosquito dunk in it, and then you put straw in there. The mosquitoes are drawn in, and then the bacteria in the dunk kills them. But they sell them at, you know, hardware stores, at the big box stores. And I found them to be very effective, and they don't kill everything. They just kill mosquitoes.
No, it sounds like a good option as a biological control. So they said, without knowing anything about them, I'm glad you educated me on them. I'll certainly look into them. Sounds like a good strategy. One of the things that that you always have to be careful of is, again, you're putting water out, you're going to attract mosquitoes. So we have examples like some people use traps for Japanese beetles. Well, if you use a trap for Japanese beetles, all you're going to do is attract Japanese beetles to your house. They're not an effective control strategy. They're not even an effective monitoring strategy, because you'll get more Japanese beetles at your house than you will at your neighbor's house. So you're doing your neighbors a favor. This case, though, it has a control mechanism in it. So if you're seeing that mosquito activity, that'd probably be good timing to use them. But again, any water is going to attract mosquitoes. It sounds like that will take care of them.
We had Rob Welch on as a guest a couple months ago, and as you know, he works with a lot of landscaping professionals and nursery growers, and just asking him, you know, if someone's interested in diversifying their landscape, where do you start? His recommendation was kind of start small.
Mm-hmm.
And don't expect a lot of contractors to be very busy. But do you have any advice on someone who's thinking about doing something in their own yard besides mowing higher, which is a great one to be reminded about?
Well, I think, again, when I said mowing higher, just talk about the lawn, but I said when I moved into my house, it was mowed property line to property line. I have about 1.33 acres. So the first thing I did is I eliminated a lot of mowed area. You could say that is because I was so environmentally conscious. My wife would say that I'm lazy. So, you know, there's two different distinctions there. So again, in the landscape, the landscape is really like the inside of your house, right? You create rooms, you create spaces that are usable. You create the wall decor, you create the furniture. And the landscape plants are really providing those furnishings and beautifying it. The lawn areas are more of the functional spaces. And so I always, when I work with clients, I ask them, you know, what do you do on outside? Do you need what you have right now? Or do you want to create spaces that are going to give you more like you have inside the house? Now that can be obviously dramatic changes in the landscape. So the idea of starting small is a very good one. Take that problem area first, the area that you never like looking at, or the area that is difficult to mow, or if you might be trying to grow lawn turf under a tree. It's not going to happen. So think about things you can do besides lawn in those areas. And I say picking on lawn just because we tend to have a lot of lawn in our landscape. We tend to have less diversity in some of our landscape. You need to do your research or work with a professional that knows what they're doing, because especially when you get into native plants, that is far less of a niche than it used to be when I first got involved in it in the mid 80s. But there's still a group of folks that may be out in the landscape that don't know that much about native plants. So make sure you do your research and think about what you want to do. Do you want to attract pollinators? I mean, that's a very good reason to put native plants in, if that's a value to you. Do you want to, again, try to attract beneficials? We're seeing a lot of work being done. Some of the work I do is with vineyards, with the wine and grape industry. And we see a lot of work being done putting in borders of native plants to attract beneficial insects to reduce pests in that vineyard. So that is, a great idea to reduce any problems you have. And as I already talked about the mosquito issue, again, anecdotal as it is. We are very fortunate in Michigan and in our area to have some growers that specialize in native plants, and not just native plants, but native plants with also native Michigan genetics. So that's the other important question to ask. We can use a plant that's native to Michigan, but if it's sourced from Tennessee, we may have issues with it. So a very good example is a redbud. Another one is flowering dogwood. If you are purchasing a redbud, you want to make sure you ask where that plant is sourced from. If it's sourced from Tennessee, you're probably going to get 1 or 2 good years out of it, and it may die, or it'll still live, but you won't get any flowering on it. If you purchase a native redbud, they're going to be self-seeding in your yard, so you may curse me after that, but they act like they're a completely different plant. So when I think about a landscape, then do you have problem areas? Is it an area that you can make a transition to something different? I think the start small is key. I also think soil prep is important. So a lot of our residential sites, we're trying to grow things on subsoil. You know, the topsoil has been stripped off, sold by the developer, or they just dig the foundation, the topsoil gets buried. So plants don't like growing in subsoil. You can improve soil simply by mulching. Shredded leaves, shredded bark, any organic material will be beneficial. And so I sometimes recommend to people, create your bed lines first, put some mulch down, maybe wait a season before you're ready to plant, and you'll see that soil already beginning to transform. That's another good way to kind of start smaller and not jump in with both feet. So, so Leroy, I don't know if I answered that question or not. I know I did.
Yeah, that's great. If others have additional comments or questions or knowledge, feel free to pipe in. Again, this is pretty much an open dialogue, so feel free to ask other questions. Don't necessarily have to relate to this general theme, but as you can see, Tom's got a lot of knowledge, and I really appreciate you taking your time with us, Tom.
No, my pleasure. And don't shy away from controversy. There's a lot of controversial things going on out there, and I'm happy to at least give you my opinion. I think we, unfortunately, in this day and age, we tend not to have these dialogues where we can have, share opinions, and it may not be your opinion, but there's a respect, and I appreciate that very much. So.
Tom, have you noticed this year, this is a little bit off the topic, but as far as the mast produced by nut trees, by oak trees and so on, to me, it looks like we've got a lot fewer acorns this year than last year. Last year we had a bumper crop, and this year it's like there's no acorns at all. Have you seen any fluctuations from year to year? And also, I don't know if you saw the survival rate of oak tree seedlings apparently is way down due to the deer population. And foresters in the state are concerned about the next generation of oak trees, that we're just not getting the natural reproduction due to, number one, overdevelopment. We're paving over everything. And then number two, the deer population.
So yeah, good question. I think there is some fluctuation with acorn production. I've, heard a lot of things, says we're going to have a bad winter if there's a lot of acorns. I don't know why. I think some of it may be conditions when oaks are pollinated, they're wind pollinated. So that may have something to do with it. So I don't know if there's any direct link to what lack of acorn production means. The deer population is really problematic. And it's amazing how many deer you see and where you see them. I'm driving along Okemos Road, they're deer. I'm not talking about rural Okemos Road. I'm talking about beyond the Meridian Township Fire Station there and going up towards Mount Hope, near Science Parkway. I see a herd of deer. I've seen a herd of deer there a couple different times. Driving down Dobie Road because Okemos Road is closed through, always deer. They are really devastating on the natural landscapes. So here's here's one of those unintended consequences. Everybody loves deer, right? I mean, they're fascinating to see, but they do so much damage to natural habitats and into managed landscapes that we have a deer population much higher than what it would naturally be if we had a more balanced system of predators. We don't have that, obviously. So I know when you get into deer culls, it becomes very, very controversial. But the consequences of a high deer population are going to be very dramatic on not only our crops, our food system, but also on those natural landscapes and on our managed landscapes. Relative to deer or to oak seedlings, again, deer browsing is really dramatic. But I also think we don't see as many oaks planted in our managed landscapes. And that's because for a nursery grower to grow oaks, they take longer to produce. They're harder to transplant. And it's unfortunate because we continue or should be learning our lesson of not having a monoculture. So I grew up in Detroit. I grew up with elm trees along every street, creating a canopy. And of course, we had Dutch elm disease, and it completely changed the landscape. And then we had a tree that grew fast, was pretty pest resistant, and it was planted everywhere. And those are our ash trees. And along comes emerald ash borer, and it just completely devastates the landscape. So just as we talk about diversity in landscapes, natural landscapes as well as managed landscapes, that needs to include diversity in the trees we plant, in what cities are planting. And so an oak may be more expensive, but it really adds some diversity to the landscape. And not just a red oak is probably the most common, but we have some, white oaks are gorgeous, swamp white oak if you have heavier soils, pin oaks if you have the right soil pH, because if you have high pH, they can get iron deficiency. So I think that's another thing that a township, a municipality can have an impact on. What are some of the trees that are being put out in those landscapes? I've seen some smaller trees, hop hornbeams. It's a native tree that is a really nice medium-sized tree. It can be pruned to be a street tree. So I think looking at diversity of tree plantings would be beneficial. I know I got off track, but I think the question of why are oaks potentially threatened? There's a whole organization focused on white oaks and trying to make sure that we don't lose that tree. And it's a national organization, part of I think a forestry group. So I think again with information sent out to homeowners, with information sent out to businesses, and with policies adopted at the township level, not necessarily policies that have a stick, but policies that have an incentive. Could you, for example, have a I'm spending your money now, kind of an incentive, a co-payment. If you plant these trees, we're going to provide a rebate in something. So it's not saying you can't do this, it's saying we encourage you to do this. And sometimes those are more effective. So thanks for bringing that to everybody's attention. I have a woodlands in the back of my yard. It doesn't belong to me, but it has red oak. It has, it's pretty diverse. We have some beautiful oaks there.
Are you familiar with any townships having tree ordinances to protect trees or encourage homeowners to plant trees? I don't believe Meridian Township has anything in place to protect trees.
Yeah, I don't know. They're obviously very impacted by construction. So I think Michigan State University does a great job when they have a construction project where you see the trees fenced in, at least out to the drip line or beyond, because the root system will go well beyond that drip line.
We do have a land clearing ordinance and soil erosion permit, which are sort of related to these, but maybe someone from our code enforcement could probably answer that better. But we have talked a little bit about more of a tree related policies, and certainly something we could revisit.
Tom, I'm curious how your organization works with our conservation districts, which really seem to work hand in hand with our farmers in our Tri-County region.
So I've had engagement with the national organization representing conservation districts through the National Pesticide Safety Education Center. We haven't done a lot with them, but I think they're at the state level, at the local level, they're critical. I used to do a lot of work with conservation district, Ingham County Conservation District with plant rescue. So I think a very important organizations when you talk about habitat and preservation of habitat. They do have some plant sales. Again, sometimes they have pretty good plant material. Sometimes they may be buying stuff in that doesn't do the job that maybe it should do. And I'm not pointing at Ingham County. I think they're a good organization. They're very important within agriculture and also some of the incentives for agriculture to provide sustainable practices. And also your county, I've got to get the name right, your county sewer district, right? When we think about, it's not,
Drain office.
Drain commissioner, yes. Again, very important. And of course, in Ingham County, we've had some very innovative things done out of Ingham County with wetlands creation and things like that, rain gardens. So thank you, Laura. I was thinking of sewer, but it's drain. We don't want our sewers to be our drains or drains to be our sewers, I guess is the right way to say it.
Is there an active plant rescue program in the region that you know of? Again, maybe just describing that briefly would be helpful to people.
So I'm not aware of one, but I haven't stayed in touch. So there may be, I don't know. So it was with my landscape company where we first got involved in plant rescue, and actually we were clearing some land for a development, and it was we just recognized all the native vegetation, particularly some of the smaller trees and native shrubs, as well as the ground cover, things like trillium, jack in the pulpit, some of our other ground cover plants, Pennsylvania sedge. And we thought, God, what a waste of this. So we actually, in the clearing, began to collect this material. And as I mentioned, in the mid 80s, Grassroots Inc. began to specialize in native plants and native habitats. And so that was the time we were doing some of these projects. And we got linked in with City of East Lansing when they did their recycling day, and they had a plant sale. And we were able to link in with them and provide some of the native woodland plants primarily the trillium, wild geranium, jack in the pulpit, those types of things, for them to sell as a fundraiser to support their activity. So it's interesting when you start to do plant rescue. It's very effective in a woodland setting because the topsoils in woodlands, it's opposite of what you probably think. They're very shallow. And the plants that grow in a woodland are typically very shallow rooted because they're not going to root into soils that are not suited to them. So most of the woodland wildflowers are very easy to transplant. If you are doing that, you do need a inspection from Michigan Department of Agriculture, and it's a plant pest health inspection, because you don't want to be moving plants from one area to another that may have some type of pest associated with it. So we would always get an inspection. We would always get permission in writing from the landowner, whomever that may be, indicating that we were going to be doing this plant rescue. But it does give you an opportunity to get some plants that are just not readily available in the landscape trade. And they are very persistent. So I have an area in my yard that I put a lot of plant rescue material in. Wild geranium or wild ginger is another one. Solomon seal, false Solomon seal, you go on and on. And Laura, I have some old kind of fact sheets about woodland wildflowers, and I'd be happy to share them with you, and you can share them if they're if you'd like to with the group. They're old, but I think they're still relevant because we don't see a lot of new woodland wildflowers. They're still the same ones. So it was just a fun thing for us to do, and felt like we were saving some things and contributing back to the community, those people that wanted to plant those plants. So does that answer your question, Leroy? Anything else? Because you were pretty involved in some of this stuff too.
I wish Emma was at this conversation. Emma's our naturalist. Have you met Emma Campbell yet?
I have not.
She runs Michigan Conservation Corps and does several activities a week. I think this might be a really cool thing for some of her core of volunteers to get involved with.
Yeah, I think the important thing is you don't want people going out to natural areas and just digging native plants. But so we were really conscientious of that. We never did that. We worked with areas that we know were going to be basically destroyed. They're going to be developed. So that plant material was going to be eliminated. Let me just add, I did a real interesting project in Southfield. It was for one of their parks areas, and they were going to be redoing part of a 9-hole golf course, and they were going to be impacting a very old woodland. And I was brought in as a consultant on the project because they had a regulation that if they were going to destroy natural areas, they would have to replace it somewhere. And I don't know if it was, I think it was a 1-to-1, but it might have been larger than that. So when I got down on site, they were talking about areas that we could do a natural planting, and looked at this woodland, and I kind of came up with the very simplistic idea, well, why don't we just move the woodland? And they looked at me like I was crazy, but we put together a proposal, and we did just that. We had large tree spades coming in to move native trees, and there were a lot of oaks in that area. We scooped up soil with big front end loaders and moved the woodland topsoil somewhat intact. Obviously, you get a little disturbance into this new area, and we created, replaced, or really moved over an acre of this woodland into a brand new area. And we knew we were going to get some loss, particularly of trees, but we wanted to get some larger trees in there to create that woodland environment of shade, even though we knew that we were probably moving trees that did not have good viability. Now, we moved a lot of trees that were smaller that would be that replacement. So the strategy was these trees were going to be eliminated anyways. let's get some in there to create that as close to that habitat as you could. We couldn't duplicate it because we had some 100-year-old oak trees in the area, but we could move some large stuff and try to move soil intact and create that woodland environment. It's a very successful project. So that was kind of the ultimate plant rescue project that I was involved in for, I think, a pretty good cause.
That would be really nice for that to happen if this development just north of the old Panera at Central Park does end up happening, because there's a lot of good stuff back in there, I imagine. So it would be nice if the township could proactively move that instead of just destroying all of it.
Yeah, and my mind, I don't remember half the things that I did and what I did yesterday, but I did another project. It was a large golf course project where I came in on the project and they were going to be eliminating a lot of these natural areas and seeding them into a normal turf they would use. And it was a really unique habitat up in the Grayling area in Roscommon. The course is Forest Dunes Golf Club. And we did the same thing. There was a really unique habitat of very dry, almost like our dry prairie. It was almost like sand dunes in the middle of the state. And we, again, with tree spades, with front end loaders, moved entire pieces of this landscape that was going to be destroyed due to this development and replace it. And it completely changed the look and the play of the golf course, because it no longer had that, all grass area. It was wasteland, it was sand, it was these native plants that were adapted, including native grasses like little blue stem, big blue stem, Indian grass. That turned out really, really cool too. So if you have those types of areas, it's pretty cost effective because you're using large equipment. You're not doing a lot of, digging by hand like we would dig Trillium. You're using large equipment to move it. And a lot of times that large equipment is on site already. It's just knowing what you can move, what's worth moving. And if it is a good, diverse site that has native plant material on it, it's pretty effective.
Are there contractors, or do you still do that type of work, Tom, if to like assess a property and maybe put together a plan and estimate to potentially work with the developer if this project goes through? Because it's a pretty precious part of our township. And I think I love Sarah's idea. If we could do some creative things, they're already looking at preserving the wetlands on the property.
Good.
But there's a lot of obviously change that would occur if they build these, I don't know how many 100 units.
Yeah, no, I'd be very interested in a project like that. I didn't come here to sell anything. I still have my company on paper, but I'm pretty busy with my other work, but I still have a passion about those types of things. So I would be delighted to, take a look at something like that and see if that's a feasible way to go. It sounds like it is from what you said.
Well, I would hope so. I think the developer is somewhat surprised that the project is moving forward. I think there's a lot of issues with it, but it seems like there's some momentum to doing it, and they might be willing to do something a little different. I don't know.
Well, I will tell you again, I think when you look at the cost effectiveness of it versus creating a landscape from scratch, I think they may find from a cost standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to do it and eliminate some of the areas that are, manicured landscape where they have to bring in all the trees and shrubs and lawn and, sprinkler system. It potentially is a saver. Tom asked a question about any suggestions for deer resistant shrubbery. Michigan State Extension, I thought, used to have a publication, a little fact sheet on deer tolerant plants. One shrub that always comes up, which is not native, but it is deer resistant, is boxwood. But again, that's not something you necessarily want to use in a natural area, but in a managed landscape. A boxwood would be a great replacement for a yew, which is not at all deer resistant. They're deer attractants. So again, if you need an evergreen, boxwood would work well. A purple coneflower, while not a shrub, is deer tolerant. And I'm sure there's others. I've not seen any damage to the native plants I have in my landscape. So things like hop hornbeam, those are smaller trees. I don't see a lot of damage on viburnums. But I will say I think the diversity of plants in my landscape is almost a deterrent to a lot of deer damage. Now I have some hostas that get damaged quite a bit. I have some hydrangea that I saw some damage, but I didn't see any damage on a witch hazel. The native witch hazel would be a good one. Again, I think any of the viburnums would be pretty deer resistant. And I can think through that better and do a little bit of research. Let me see if I missed any other questions. Thanks for the mosquito dunks.
I have a question about that. I just bought a bunch of native plants from Design by Nature Burns Company, and I put them in the ground. And of course, I've got deer in the backyard, and they've nibbled them back. So does that mean they'll come back next year and they'll come back stronger because they're native? I mean, even if the deer go after them a little bit?
Yeah, they should be fine.
Okay.
Because really, when you put in a new plant, the top growth is not doing a whole lot. Obviously, there's some photosynthesis, but the plant's really putting down a root system.
Okay.
So as long as they didn't dig anything up, which they don't, you should be fine. And
Okay, thank you.
whether or not they are, deer tolerant long term is to be determined. I mean, deer eat a lot of stuff. They don't seem to be real picky eaters. So something that may be deer tolerant today, if we get a heavy pressure with deer. An example I have, again, not a native plant, but I have some myrtle growing in my yard, vinca, in an area. The deer will actually, with their hooves, clear the snow to get to that during the winter, just because they don't have any other food sources.
Well,
I would say put some chicken wire or some other fencing around it, because that's the only thing I've found that works. Because otherwise they eat just about everything. They've eaten all of our hosta. We've had to take the hosta out and replace it with ferns because they don't eat ferns. But the hostas were like candy. You would attract them into our yard. But hemlocks, they don't seem to eat that. They don't seem to eat the, what else? I'm trying to think what other, the red buds, they don't seem to eat.
Yeah, I see that too. That's a good point. I think, and it would make sense, if it's a native plant, they are probably going to be more deer tolerant than a non-native plant, only because we've had deer populations not to this level historically. So we have our plants that have adapted to deer browsing. Now, again, not to the intensity that we have today. So logically, the majority of native plants would be more deer tolerant than some of our non-native plants.
We have about 2 more minutes. I wanted to thank you, Tom, but if anybody has any parting comments or questions, and one of mine is, are you willing to share your email or contact info, Tom, in the chat?
Yes.
If people have follow-up questions or think of things later.
Most definitely. You're getting me, you're making me multitask, which is scary. So I do my best.
All right, I could share it with the link to the recording if you like.
Now I have it right there, my MSU email. And let me give you a phone number too.
Gosh, that's more than we could ask for. Thank you so much, everybody, for your great questions. And this has been a really packed dialogue. Any other parting comments from anyone?
I'd like to mention that I saw in the news recently, this is the 50th year anniversary of the Clean Water Act.
Oh, that's great.
So that's pretty monumental.
Most definitely. Well, I've really enjoyed this a lot. I appreciate all your questions. I'm happy to get into any topic areas. As I said, it's nice to be able to sit and have a dialogue and be able to share what I think and hear what you think. I've always admired what the township has been doing to preserve under intense, I know, development pressure. So it's a tough one, I know. And Leroy, always a pleasure to work with you. So thank you for reaching out to me.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thanks so much. Yeah, this has been great. And tune in any week. This has been going for a couple of years now and always learn something. So if you have the time and interest, feel free to tune back in, all of you. Sherry, sorry we didn't get to introduce you, but hopefully see you all again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.